Well, there's no better way to start a talk on rural tales and cooking up rural goodness than with a nice photo of rural friend near Deruta, Giuseppe, and 4 prosciutti hanging in the storeroom just in front of their house. Let's remember that the prosciutti are the back hams of the pig, the back thighs, and of course they have spallette too, which are the front shoulders. And Giuseppe and her husband have produced these prosciutti. And not only that is the only goodness from their land, which we're going to learn about this evening. We'll be visiting Giuseppe and other rural friends. Now, you might think it's a bit peculiar to start a talk on rural lore, rural traditions, and rural tales with a fresco of art of Perugia. Some of you may have heard my Perugia lecture, and if you have seen my Perugia Zoom, you will remember the chapel of St. John the Baptist, which is just off the magnificent Collegio del Cambio in Perugia. That is the Money Changers Guild. The Money Changers Guild was frescoed by Perugino in the early 16th century. One of his top students was Giannicola di Paolo, who from 1513 to 1528 frescoed the chapel to John the Baptist, just adjacent to the Money Changers meeting hall. Now, John the Baptist, called the Baptist because he baptized his cousin Jesus Christ, is depicted just above the altar, and we can see that image right here. There are other frescoes related to John the Baptist, and I'm going to be talking about one in particular. Before I do, let me mention one of the scenes, familiar probably to most of you who are aware of the story of John the Baptist. Salome danced for Herod, who asked her what would she like as a thanks for her beautiful display of dancing, and she said John the Baptist's head on a platter. It's being served to Herod here. Dog and cat playing on the floor in the foreground. Opposite this fresco is the fresco that I want to talk about, which shows the birth of John the Baptist, set in a beautiful Perugia villa of the early 16th century. Notice the gorgeous dress. Notice the lovely textiles on the bed. Elizabeth has just given birth to John the Baptist. A young girl, her son Giovanni, that is, a young girl is holding water for her to wash. In the foreground, a midwife is washing the child, who will grow up to be John the Baptist. But there's a detail in here that I want to focus on in particular. 2 women at the foot of the bed. And look at this gentleman. What's he holding? He's holding a basket. You can see there's a chicken in there. It's actually una gallina vecchia, an old hen. There's the Italian saying, la gallina vecchia fa buon brodo. An old hen makes good broth, meaning that an elderly woman can offer us sage advice. But the buon brodo is an integral part of rural life, I think probably in most of the areas of Italy, but particularly in Umbria. The buon brodo, and we can see it here, of Umbria, the chicken broth, which brings strength, is made with meat, generally just the chicken. The farm women often wouldn't put in beef because their cattle were going to be sold to bring in meat to to bring in income to the family. So in the buon brodo here in Umbria of the simple farm people would be the chicken, maybe the legs, the back, the wings, the head, the parts of the chicken that didn't count particularly and weren't particularly eaten or cooked up to put into a pasta dish or whatever. And there'd be a stalk of celery, a carrot, an onion, and some people would put in a potato. Now, the Gallina Vecchia tradition of bringing a hen to a woman who has given birth is an ancient tradition, which still continues today. And when I was in the hospital in Foligno in January of 1980, having given birth to our son, Keegan, a farm woman, Chiarina, came to visit me, and she had a huge jar of brodo di pollo, a jar of chicken broth. And she said, Anna, buongiorno. And I said, buongiorno, Chiarina. And she gave it to the nurse, and she said it's for her. And the nurse nodded. She knew exactly what to do with it. It was to be served to me because the Umbrians believe that, number one, the chicken broth brings us strength, but number two, it helps the milk let down. So an old hen is given when a woman gives birth, and her mother-in-law or whoever or herself will cook up a broth to have frequently as she's nursing this child. This is Chiarina who brought me that chicken. And here she's not holding a chicken. She's holding different doves that she's raised and she's plucked and she's going to cook up. These are 5 young people, delightful, from North Carolina. And they had joined me with their parents for my Rural Life Revisited tour. And we visit the farm people, and we ended up having lunch with Chiarina. And before we went in to have lunch, she brought out these plucked doves to show the children. They were quite astounded. And then in the chicken broth will go the celery, the carrots, onions, and the potatoes. Now, after I'd been viewing that fresco for many years and talking about it as a guide. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I looked at it again and I said, that's the gallina vecchia. That's the old hen being brought to make the broth so Elizabeth can nurse better John the Baptist. You see, because if it's a young chicken, the meat comes right off the bones. An old hen is better because it simmers and it won't come off the bones, and it really makes the best broth. When we raised our chickens, we always used their eggs. Now and then a young chicken would be killed to be roasted or whatever. But the old hens, when they were no longer laying eggs, they were put into broth. Now, after I realized that the old hen for the broth was in this fresco about John the Baptist, I was at dinner at Peppa's. And I remember telling Peppa, there she is, Peppa, you can't believe it, but in this fresco in Perugia, Peppa's been to Perugia about once. She didn't know what fresco meant, so I explained it's a painting on a wall. There's a painting of John the Baptist's birth, and his mother Elizabeth is in bed, and a farmer is bringing her the gallina vecchia, the old hen. And Peppa just laughed, smiled, beamed, as she is here with her wine next to her, and said, "Beh certo, of course. Anybody who's given birth is given a hen for brodo." And she said to me, "So what did you do?" Because at the time we didn't know Peppa. "Who brought you the broth?" And I said, "Well, Chiarina brought me the broth." And she smiled very proudly and smugly, and she said, "Well, when my firstborn, Leonella, was born, do you know how many chickens were brought to me?" And I said, "No." And she said with great pride, 35. And I said, "What did you do with 35 hens or chickens?" And she said, "Oh, they were kept outside, and they were free range. And whenever I needed more broth, I killed one and made my broth, so she could have brodo the many months that she was nursing her son." Now, let's see how that broth is made. And I want to right now thank Sonia. I hope you're seeing this. Sonia is from Northern Italy, from Treviso. She was with us maybe 3 weeks in a workaway program, and she's a photographer and a videographer, and she did the videos for this program. And here's a video of making the broth. Let us do together an Ombrian recipe, which is used extensively by the farm people. Just a wholesome, delicious brodo, or broth. Into that broth can go many things. Sometimes in the evenings, it would just be pastine in brodo, a little bit of tiny little pasta in broth. Or for a special lunch, it can be tortellini in broth. Those wonderful dumplings, if you will, filled with pork. Now, let us first learn how we're going to make the broth. Very simple, actually. This is meat that I bought today from our butcher, just a couple of wings and perhaps a thigh. Then about 4 pieces of lean beef, and of course, bones, good beef bones. We're going to put that in water, bringing it to a boil, along with a couple potatoes,
couple carrots, an onion, and a stalk of celery. And you know, it's just fine to use the leafy part of the celery. And then the stem can be used for something else, or the stalk might be used for your salad or something. So I'm all set. Just have to finish peeling the onion, and then we'll head over and start our broth. So these are the ingredients we're going to put in to the water, which we bring to a boil. And look at how simple it is to make this. As I've said before, when talking about Umbrian rural cuisine, it must be delicious because you're feeding Italians, but it must be quick because the women have so much to do, and it's not just the cooking. Okay, let's go over to the stove, and in go the ingredients. There go the vegetables. And now we're going to put in the meats. And you know what's delicious is after you've made the broth, you take all the meat off the bones, mash the potatoes, mash the carrots, and season them with oil and lemon juice, salt and pepper. And that makes a second course for your dinner after the broth. Water should come up about 2/3. Okay, so it's going to simmer. And then after it simmers, I'm going to be adding salt. Remember our rule, QB, quanto basta, as much as you need. I'll need about 2 tablespoons of coarse salt for this much. And so now we have our broth boiling. And as it starts to come to a boil, I will cover it and slightly lower the heat. So it's simmering at sort of a nice low medium boil. All right, our first step is done.
Now, we're going to learn something else. Into the broth, we're going to put eggs whipped with Parmesan cheese, stirring it in, and making a kind of egg drop soup called stracciatella, which means little rags, little shreds. Lo straccio is kind of an old dish towel. And I want to mention, before I show you how to make stracciatella, something that Pino told me about the importance of broth also in the Sicilian culture. And Pino told me this. He said that when there was a death in the family or somebody was dying, there was a lot of keening and mourning by the women. And near the death of the person, death as much as possible would be in the family home. The family would be taking care of this person who was ill. A woman at a certain point would say, "It's time to kill an old hen," and start simmering the broth. And that is because after the death of the person, when somebody was suffering immensely, didn't have much of an appetite, had exhausted himself or herself with the mourning and the keening, broth would give them strength. Pino put it this way. He said this, and I'd like to read the Italian, then I'll translate it. Why the broth? He said, perché il brodo è facile da digerire e dà forza a chi ha dolore e sofferenza. Because a broth, he told me, is easy to digest and gives strength to someone with pain and suffering. So isn't it interesting, this sense of the broth as strength in the culture of Sicily, in the culture of Umbria, I would say just in Italy in general. Now let's see how to make this stracciatella. Very simple.
And now that our broth is ready, we're going to whip in the fresh eggs mixed with Parmesan cheese. I like to add a little grated lemon peel, and we're whipping it into the boiling brodo, and we will have stracciatella, the rags, if you will. Let's see how we do this. Easy. We use 1 egg for every 2 people. Now look at these. These are our eggs from our chickens. This could have a double yolk. Let's see. Didn't surprise me. This, yes. Have a look.
Egg. See the spot?
Got a double yolk. You can see it's a fertilized egg. We have a rooster as well as hens. That's fine. Extra nutrition. Actually, probably with a double yolk, I could use 1 egg, but I'll just add 2 anyway. Look at these beautiful yolks. Sign of healthy free-range chickens. I whip the eggs. And to the eggs, I'm going to be adding a generous amount of Parmesan, or mixed Parmesan and Pecorino, mixed Parmesan and Romano. And I am going to add some black pepper. I am not adding any salt to these eggs because, of course, there's a lot of salt in the cheese. So now, beautiful bouquet perfume of the grated lemon peel. You don't need too much. In it goes. I have brought the broth to a boil. And now what I'm going to do when I stir this in is bring all this over to the gas stove so you can see it a bit better. Generous amount of Parmesan, as you can see. Okay, in it goes. Keep whisking.
That's the eggs and Parmesan now.
And I want it to come once again to a boil. And you'll see the consistency it will become as it comes up to a boil again. And it's sort of flouring. Little strips, little rags, stracciatella. Look at this glory. Is that a nutritious dish? Which the farmer women could make for their family. They would always have their meats, chicken. They'd have the carrot, celery, onion. They didn't always have beef because often the beef cows were sold for meat. They just make it with chicken broth in that case. They always had their eggs, and what a nutritious dinner this would be for the family. Okay, and now we're going to head to the table. Pino, stasera c'è la stracciatella. Che ne dici?
Davvero?
Buona idea. He says, really? You knew it was stracciatella. Really?
Who make it?
What?
Who make it?
Who made it? I made it.
Oh, good.
Good.
He enjoyed the stracciatella. It's a wonderful, simple dish. I've included it because in this part of my rural talk, we're moving into fall, as I've mentioned. And stracciatella is not a dish we would have in June, July, August, September even, from October on when the days get chillier and the nights get chillier. Another important rural tradition is centered in November, and particularly the first 2 days of November. All Saints' Day, November 1st, All Souls' Day, November 2nd. And not just a rural tradition, an urban tradition. It's a national tradition to visit the cemeteries in these moments. The cemeteries are visited frequently. Just look at how beautifully they're kept up. But in November 1st, November 2nd, more visits. And as Peppa said, we go around our farm neighbor Peppa. You're going to see her in this talk as well. And you've already seen her with her glass of wine and her bottle of wine. Peppa would say, so many visits do we make on November 1st and 2nd. We go to all the cemeteries. So her sons will take her to visit aunts and uncles and second cousins who might be in other places than the Assisi Cemetery. So if you're ever in Italy in November, really do not miss the experience of going into the cemetery and joining these people as they leave flowers, particularly chrysanthemums or the flowers of the dead, for their loved ones. And you can hear conversations as you walk through. When I was in the cemetery, this was the November 1st, the people would say, qui è Chiara, here's Chiara, and here's Giuseppe. Remember how wonderful he was, and I wonder how his children are. It was really a social event, this visiting of the cemeteries. Look at all the chrysanthemums. Now, I want to tell you right now, this is the Assisi Cemetery. Please, please, please never bring chrysanthemums as a gift if you're invited to an Italian home. I did as a student in Rome. I was invited to an Italian home for dinner. It was in early November by an Italian friend, and I felt very proud because I thought by then I'd understood enough of Italian culture to know I should go with a bottle of wine or some beautiful flowers. Well, I arrived at the door of my friend's apartment, Patrizia's apartment, and her mother opened the door and just screamed. I was holding a huge bouquet of chrysanthemums, and she started to do this. I don't know if you've ever seen my lecture. I did a talk on Italian gestures. Keep away the evil eye, because bringing chrysanthemums into the house would have been bringing a death wish into the house, because it's a cemetery flower. So Patrizia, my friend, sort of understood that, I didn't understand Italian customs as yet, and she was just laughing. And her mother just took the bouquet from me. She tried to be polite, and she said, grazie mille. And she gave them to Patrizia, and she said, portali alla nonna. Take them to your grandmother. And they had to stay outside the house until Patrizia could take them the next morning to the cemetery, to the nonna. Here is the scene outside the Italian cemeteries in November 1st, November 2nd. Beautiful, beautiful displays of color. I mentioned in my talk on the Holocaust and Holocaust survival, how Donaldo Brunacci, here he is he's the priest who saved 300 Jewish refugees hidden in Assisi in World War II. And this is his a great nephew visiting him. He's putting also stones on the cross, which is a Jewish tradition when visiting the deceased. And there were also chrysanthemums for Donaldo. And right near Donaldo's tomb is the tomb of Clara Weiss, who was the only Jewish refugee who in the year of hiding in Assisi died. I think she died of a heart attack, and I'd mentioned her in the Holocaust survival talk. You can see a Star of David here. That was put on her tomb in the 1950s by her son. I believe he was in Argentina. Her tombstone locus was bought by Donaldo Brunacci. You can see all the stones left by visitors. Now, the Day of the Dead, the Time of the Dead, has a culinary tradition very much loved here in Umbria. And it's the making of the pasta dolce, or the sweet pasta. Now, here's Peppa. This is a few days before November 1st, November 2nd. She's crushing her walnuts. Look at her sophisticated tool. It's just a hammer. To make the pasta dolce, which is made with fettuccine, pasta, tagliatelle, and cacao, and some maybe grated grated lemon peel, crushed walnuts, sugar. And the red color is from the Alkermes liqueur, which is kind of a taste like grenadiers. And this sweet for the Day of the Dead, All Souls Day, is called la pasta dolce. It's sweet pasta. It can be made with tagliatelle, or it can even be made with macaroni, penne, rigatoni, and then they would call it macaroni dolce, sweet macaroni. And this is how they particularly make it over in the Orvieto area. Now, Peppa is thrilled with her pasta dolce. Pino is not. Here we are at dinner, one November 2nd at Peppa's, and Pino's had a long day, so he's taking a rest after dinner. And Peppa has left him the pasta dolce with a glass of her vino rosso. We eat it very politely. We're not particularly fond of it. And Pino, after all, from Sicily, he'd much rather have a cannoli siciliano filled with ricotta than sweet pasta. You really have to have a taste for it. Not even all Umbrians like it, but it is certainly a tradition. Farmer friend Giuseppa, who was in the photo with the prosciutti, told me that her family also had pasta dolce on Christmas Eve. Pasta dolce gives us an idea of the simplicity of rural cuisine. That is, they want to make something sweet for All Saints' Day, a holiday, but they're going to make it out of what they can grow on their land. They all have flour because they've all grown wheat, so they can all make pasta, which also takes the eggs, and they've got the eggs. They've probably all got walnuts. Sugar and the powdered chocolate and Alkermes, how will they get that? Well, the farm women, maybe in October, would walk to Assisi with big baskets of mushrooms on their head, sell them at the outdoor market, and use the coins to buy these special additions to the pasta dolce. Or they might sell chicory. And there's Peppa making her pasta dolce, making the fettuccine. Here she's just made the sfoglia. And here it's all folded up and she's slicing it. Rural friend near Deruta, Giuseppa will also be making the pasta dolce. This photo was taken actually when I was bringing some people for lunch there. She's a hit on my Perugia Deruta tour. We go to Perugia, then we go have lunch with Giuseppa outside Deruta, and then we see how all the beautiful ceramics are made in Deruta. And this is definitely not pasta for pasta dolce, and I'll tell you why. Giuseppa, when she makes her fettuccine for pasta dolce, will use less eggs than she usually does because she doesn't want the fettuccine to be too rich because they're going to be highlighted with that chocolate crushed walnut mixture. Recently, I was at Giuseppa's house with Sonia, our workawayer, who was just great and really enjoyed Giuseppa, and she took these photos for me, and she also did the videos of Giuseppa making pasta and so forth, which we'll see. And as we arrived, there was Giuseppa at the gate with her beloved Jack Russell dogs, Lily and Lady. Lily's the mother on the left, the white dog, and I had Lady, the pup. We also went to visit the wild boar dogs of Giuseppa's son, and they also belong to Giuseppa's husband, Paolo. Dear Paolo, some of you listening to this talk may have been with me on the Perugia Deruta tour. You remember Paolo. He died a couple years ago, and very sadly, we're sorry about that. And these dogs are wild boar dogs. They're a French breed. They hunt wild boar, and they also hunt wolves, I've heard. And the dog breed is called Briquet Griffon Venden, and they have 10 of these dogs. So we stopped to see the wild boar dogs, stopped to get some eggs for making the fresh pasta, and I really wanted to stop at the pepper tree. What a beautiful perfume these leaves have of black pepper, spicy black pepper. It's astounding. Giuseppa told me that a friend of hers or her son Loris had been to Morocco and brought back the seeds, planted them, and the tree didn't grow for him, but their pepper tree grew. And sometimes she will use the leaves of the pepper tree to put in roasted meats and so forth. And of course, we had to stop. I had wanted to show Sonia the outdoor bread oven. Many of you are familiar with it if you've heard my talk on Easter and the making of the cheese breads, or heard the talk which included Giuseppa and her cheese breads recently, one of the Rural Life talks. So that is the outdoor bread oven where she bakes about 14 cheese breads for Easter, but also will roast geese, ducks, chicken, whatever in here. Now, let's see Giuseppa cooking up some of the goodness.
Everybody, today you're going to meet a national treasure, Giuseppa, also called Pina and loved by everyone. Giuseppa, buongiorno.
Buongiorno,
Adesso andiamo in casa.
Sì.
And now we're going into her house.
È un onore per me dopo tanto tempo con la pandemia di potersi riabbracciare, di poterci vedere come il cielo che è sereno, così anche la nostra vita speriamo sarà serena.
Ecco. She said it's so good to see each other again, and we have a serene blue sky today up there. And let's hope our lives can continue to be serene. We haven't seen each other in a while.
Oops, I'm going to side this over for you.
Before Giuseppa makes us homemade pasta, she's going to make us a little sughetto, a little bit of sauce, which she's calling la matriciana. You can see her delicately holding the meat. Questo che lo chiami la pancetta?
Pancetta arrotolata di maiali.
She's calling this pancetta rotolata di maiale, which is rolled up bacon of the pig. This is theirs, obviously. They raised the pig. Now it's time to dice the onion, which is going to be added along with the pancetta. They grew the onions too, of course. Everything that you eat in Giuseppe's house comes from the land. This is true 0 kilometer eating, as they call it in Italian. That means no distance from the land to the table. Questa è cucina 0 chilometro.
Sì, è tutto a zero, meno di zero, è dentro casa.
And in fact, she said it's less than a kilometer because it's actually right in the
La
house.
cipolla è
right in the
dell'orto,
back.
il maiale era di casa, quindi...
The pig was ours. The onion, excuse me, is from our garden. So it's
Allora, adesso mettiamo
closer than 0 kilometers.
la cipolla,
Now she's putting it in the pan, as you can see. Here,
cipolla,
putting it right in. Now she's going to add the oil. So it's not necessary to add the oil first. It can come after. And of course, this is olio 0 chilometro as well.
oliva,
And extra virgin olive oil. Look at that beautiful color. She said, I'm going to put in a drop of water, and she wants the onion to become blonde. Just slightly change its color.
quando la cipolla è bionda ci aggiungiamo la pancetta.
And when the onion is a nice blonde or light color, we'll add the bacon. Look at it. She says it's not yet golden. Non è ancora dorato. It's still white, so it has to cook a little bit more before the bacon goes in. Now it's time for the pancetta to join the golden onion. Now she's mixing it up. They're joined together. Now, before we add the tomato sauce, we're going to add a little bit of the vino. And this is vino loro. Yes, go. Vino rosato. Ecco, Giuseppe, ci fai vedere il tuo vino?
Eccolo,
Oh.
guarda che colore.
Ha detto guarda che colore, look what color. Now, if you have a look at the sauce here, we can see that the wine has evaporated, and Giuseppe is adding her tomato sauce. Again, less than kilometro zero, this cooking. There it is. Ooh. She put in 2 jars of tomato sauce. She's going to check for salt later because the bacon is salty, so she doesn't want to anticipate the addition of salt. She said she's tasted her bacon and she found the bacon quite salty, so she would not add any salt now to the sauce.
And there's the amatriciana. Now, let me tell you, lunch with Giuseppe is the hit of the Perugia Deruta tour, as you can see. The wonders of Perugia enchant all, but stopping with Giuseppe for lunch is really the icing on the cake before we go into Deruta to see how the beautiful maiolic is made. And these are just a couple scenes of memorable lunches with Giuseppe. Look at the cake she baked. And this gentleman on the right has learned to say, remember from my gesture lecture, good, and too delicious, buonissimo. But he said, Anna, I can't do buonissimo or I'll drop the cake. Let's see, I think I have, yes. Here, these 2 friends as well, Jim and Cindy, and a friend of theirs enjoying homemade tagliatelle made by Giuseppe. They wrote me later an unforgettable meal. These young children came on the tour with their parents, and Giuseppe brought them some of the fettuccine that she'd made and was going to be cooking up for them to show them. Now, let's see how she makes the fettuccine.
Now Giuseppe is going to make the pasta. She's created la fontana, which we'd call the well. In go the eggs. Look at those golden yolks. These are the eggs that the chickens gave us this morning and that we collected together. How many eggs? Quante uova?
3, 6, 9.
9 uova! These hens have done a good job today. The beauty of the golden yolks. And we're going to see Giuseppe turn this into exquisite pasta. Using her fingers to pull all the flour to the eggs. Da che età hai cominciato a fare la pasta?
Beh, da una quindicina d'anni, 15-16 anni.
Non
Sì, sì,
facevi la pasta prima.
No, perché io avevo una sorella che aveva 5 anni più di me.
Uh-huh.
E allora la mamma prima faceva imparata lei che era più grande.
She's only been making, she hasn't been making it since she was a child, really, because in her family, her mother taught the oldest daughter to make the pasta. And they would have homemade pasta on Sundays, especially. And she's bringing all the flour into the eggs, and no measuring. It's just quanto basta, come farina.
Io ho fatto a occhio, dopo alle volte può darsi che ci aggiungo.
She says, I do it by
Se è dura ci
eye.
metto un pochino di acqua.
She said,
che viene più
sometimes if I've guessed it
perché
wrong and put
viene
in too
anche
much
più
flour, I
leggera.
add water to make it lighter. She wants to make her pasta a bit lighter. And she says, using an espresso cup like this, and it wasn't even full, I'm putting in a liquid which is less than the amount of the liquid of an egg, actually. Look at those hands. With her hardworking hands. Guarda le mani di Giuseppe, ho detto. Now she has a nice roll to it. And you see she rolls it out and then flaps the two ends together. Now she's rolling the pasta, giving it a lot of muscle work. And it's soon going to be time to set it aside a bit before cutting. And the pressure is using the wrist. You don't put your hands on it, you rub it with your wrists, back and forth, back and forth. Now the dough is the right consistency. And Giuseppe's rolled it, and then now with this last roll, we're then going to let it dry. So there it is, look at that beauty. And look at, and if you come over here, we want to have a look here. You can see the light through the dough. Can you see the light right through the dough? She has spread out her tablecloth in the dining area. And we're going to let it dry just to the right moment when it's ready to be cut. I used to spread it on the bedspread. I put out a cloth like this and it dried on my bedspread. Io dicevo, quando facevo la pasta la asciugavo sul letto. Con sotto
Infatti adesso...
una tovaglia.
E certo, perché io quando ne fa parecchio c'è quel lettino di là, si asciuga prima.
She does that too, when she makes a lot. She dries it on a bed in the other room.
Ci metto la tovaglia sopra il lettino, poi apro un po' la finestra, si sa asciugare presto. E a dire la verità, quando è l'inverno che c'è l'umidità, se non si asciuga con fretta, più il forno.
And she says, this is the trick which I never used. In the winter, if it's not drying and it's too damp, I take out the hairdryer and give it a quick dry. Holding the pasta, and she's going to cut it for delicious.
She's got a little bit of flour on it so it doesn't stick together.
She gives it a wiggle and a shake so they don't stick together as they dry. There goes Giuseppe draining the pasta. And the pasta is perfectly al dente, not overcooked, but to the tooth. Che profumo!
Ci si può fare qualsiasi pasta con questo il sugo.
And as she's mentioning, you can use any pasta you wish with this amatriciana sauce. Spaghetti, for example.
Penne,
Even the thick penne pasta,
farfalle, rigatoni.
all of them. Nice sprinkle of cheese. And then the final mix. Grazie, Giuseppe.
Prego.
One more touch of sauce.
And it was an absolutely marvelous, marvelous lunch. And not just the fettuccine with the amatriciana sauce, but after the torta bread, which we'll see in a future talk, filled with sliced prosciutto and salami. The salami that her son Loris made with a little bit of pork meat from the pig and also wild boar meat, and it was absolutely divine. And here's the torta, and some slices were filled with cooked greens, and these are the affettate, the sliced meats, the prosciutto and the wild boar salami, and pork salami, which you can see there. And before we left, for myself and Sonia, a very special treat, a glass of their Vin Santo, the holy wine, made when grapes are dried till they become raisins and then pressed. And they will be, probably this wine might be drunk for the first time, maybe at Easter time, a holy moment of the year. And this Vin Santo of Giuseppe's family was of 2015. So we felt so privileged to be offered this Vin Santo with a delightful dessert she made called arancine. And when you leave Giuseppe's house, you don't go empty-handed. She sent home torta and salami and so forth for Pino. And now let us talk about another autumn festival of Umbria, of the rural people and the urban people as well. The celebration of November 11th, the Feast of San Martino, Saint Martin. And you can see him here on horseback in this marvelous fresco by the great Sienese artist, Simone Martini, who frescoed in the lower basilica of the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. And the marvelous fresco cycle about the life of St. Martin of Tours, 4th century saint, was painted by Simone Martini and his crew between 1313 and 1318. San Martino, castagne e vino is the Italian saying. St. Martin's Day, chestnuts and wine, because it's on the Feast of San Martino and not before. It will only be November 11th that we taste our new wine. Most of us are making wines in October. We first taste them on November 11th, and we taste them with roasted chestnuts. Here is Peppa offering us some of her Vino Novello, the new wine with roasted chestnuts. These are some of the sayings related to the Feast of San Martino. There's a saying which is that, have you done San Martino, fare San Martino? What does this mean? The Feast of St. Martin, the 11th, is important in rural culture because it was the time when the mezzadria, or the sharecropping contracts, were stipulated. And this was during the period of San Martino. Some of the contracts would have been terminated, and therefore the farm family in that house would pack up and move. That is, they would make San Martino. Another saying is, "O che castagne e vino, tieni tutto per San Martino." Geese, chestnuts, and wine, keep them all, save them all for San Martino. And this refers to the period before Advent, when farm families indulged in abundant meals before the period of lean prior to Christmas. So, let's get those geese roasted, enjoy the chestnuts, enjoy our wine. And then this saying, "Chi vuol fare buon vino, zappi e poti a San Martino." He who wishes to have good wine should hoe, the vineyard that is, and prune at St. Martin's Day time. So that is the way that you take care of your vineyard. You hoe it and you prune it around November 11th. Then, a San Martino spilla la botte e assaggia il vino. For the Feast of St. Martin, put a spigot in your cask, the wine casks, and taste the wine. And at this time, it would be the father in the family who would go down to the wine cellar, get a bottle of the new wine for all the family to taste for St. Martin's Day. A San Martino si lascia l'acqua e si beve il vino. For St. Martin, leave behind the water and drink the wine. And then another expression is da San Martino l'inverno è in cammino. From the time of St. Martin, winter is coming in. Literally, it's on the walk. It's moving along. In other words, we're near it. And there is the table laid at Peppa's, the end of dinner, with the new wine and the roasted chestnuts. The chestnuts roasted on the wood stove. Here's Peppa with the chestnuts all washed and ready to be slit, because you make a slit in the chestnuts before you roast them on the wood stove. This is a memorable evening of Peppa with her son Giancarlo. He's digging into one of those roasted chestnuts. And Peppa is having the roasted chestnuts in her wine. She loves the chestnuts in wine. Here they are roasted on the wood stove, and you can see that they've been slit for better roasting. And in these pictures, you can see Pino and Peppa together doing the cuts in the top of the chestnut before putting them on the wood stove. Then they go onto the wood stove, and Peppa will maneuver them around with this little tool, which is usually used for moving the logs inside the wood stove. And she likes her chestnuts, once they're roasted, doused in the vino novello, or the red wine. And in the photo on the right, her son Giancarlo is showing her how she should really crush them well. He's always teaching his mother little tricks, although she's been able to teach him so much. And here she is patting those chestnuts before they're going to be taken out of the shell. She's, crushing them, and they've already been soaked in wine. Look at those hands. And this is how Peppa enjoys her roasted chestnuts in vino novello. Roasted chestnuts in a glass of red wine, nothing like it. If the chestnuts are tasty and the vino novello is tasty, or the new wine is tasty. So I hope someday you can come and join me for the Rural Life Revisited tour. And if it happens to be in November, we'll certainly stop at Peppa's house for roasted chestnuts. There they are in her wine, the Vino Novello. I'm glad you're with me tonight, and I hope to see all of you soon in Italy. And think about coming with me to Perugia and Deruta as well. And I talked to Giuseppa today on the phone, and to thank her, and I'm going to show her this video for her grandchildren and so forth. And I said, would you be willing to do a cooking class for us in your home if I brought some people to you? And she said, certo. So come soon to enjoy the rural life and rural goodness of Umbria.